And welcome to the Investment and Pension Fund Committee, 27th of February. If you don't think you're supposed to be in the Investment and Pension Fund Committee, you may leave now, but I think we're all supposed to be here. Okay, Chair's announcements. Just a reminder that this committee is being live streamed, so please use the microphones on the tables. I've noticed if your microphone flashes red, it is not picking your voice up. You need a solid red light for it to work. Please also do not hold individual conversations whilst others are speaking, because it could get picked up on the mics. Item 2, apologies for absence. I have none.
Yeah, I've received none, but we've got Michael Daniel and Joanna Cook attending remotely on the screen. No official apologies.
Okay, thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest. I should read this out. Members of the committee, please declare any interests at the appropriate time, either now or at the relevant item. Members do not need to declare if they're in receipt of a pension, as this is covered by the general dispensation, unless anything relates specifically to that member's entitlements or payments. Any declarations of interest? Okay, none at this time. Thank you. Item 4, minutes of the previous Investment and Pension Fund Committee meeting held on the 5th of December 2025, which have been previously circulated. Do we have any comments on those minutes? Okay, so I move that those minutes are accepted. Can I have a seconder? Jeff, all in favour? Okay, and that's passed. Thank you. Item 5, items requiring urgent attention. I have none. Fred? Okay, item 6, Devon Pension Board. The minutes of the Devon Pension Board meeting held on the 3rd of February 2026. There is no decision here. This is purely for noting. Are there any questions about the Devon Pension Board minutes? Roberto.
Chairman, just to point out that under item 40, the Pension Board stressed the importance of maintaining scheme member representation with new government structures.
That's noted, Roberto, and it's something that we've discussed and I've discussed with Marks and we spoke about it this morning, so I hope you're happy. Thank you. Okay, so they're duly noted. Item 7, the Brunel Oversight Board. Minutes of the Brunel Oversight Board meeting held on the 11th of December 2025. Again, no decision required. This is for noting only. Any questions on those minutes? No, thank you. So that's duly noted. Item 8, the Internal Audit Plan 2026-27. This is a report of the Director of Finance and Public Value. We're going to hear from Alexis Safin on this item, and there will be a decision required. The committee is being asked to approve the proposed internal audit plan for 2026-27, which has been considered by the Devon Pension Board on the 3rd of February with no further comments. Over to you, Alexis.
There we go.
There we go. Thank you, Chair. We got there. So this the report went to the Pension Board, and as you know, it's something that we this time of year we bring the audit plan for the forthcoming audit year, finance year, and this year I think the main highlight to bring to your attention is the increase in the number of days on the internal audit plan that's been agreed, and this is to reflect the to enable us to provide sort of assurance in additional areas, because obviously there's quite a lot of change going on at the moment, so it's just kind of reflecting that really. So we've been given some more days to help with keeping track of things really. So, and the other main difference is more around the actual, for each of the, beg your pardon, sorry, for each of them, I'm just trying to find the papers. There we go. On pages 21 onwards, or page 21, what we tried to do is to put an objective against each of the audit headings rather than just having audit headings, just to give a little bit more insight as to what's what the proposal, what the objectives of each of the audit assignments are. I haven't really got anything to add. So if anybody has any questions.
Okay, are there any questions for Alexis? Mark.
If I could just comment a little bit further. So the what is page 21 and 22 of the agenda papers, or 6 to 7 of the plan, just lists the different areas that the Devon Audit Partnership will look at that have been agreed with us as officers. So there is a number of things in there about new policies that are coming in around both investments and pensions, and following up of previous audits that have been done where we feel there's a further need to follow up. So really just for the committee to be happy that with that list of areas to be looked at, and that there aren't other things that you would want us to consider.
The other thing I would say as well is the plan. This is the plan at the beginning of the year. Things do change during the year, so there's a little bit of, we are a bit agile with the plan, and if something comes in that needs to be looked at, that has a high priority, then some of these things might get bumped, or it might be because we're waiting for some something sort of direction from the government, and maybe there's a delay, so we're having to push the audits back. So there is a little bit of flexibility around what we cover, but this is the starting point anyway.
Yes, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. On page 6, you outline the activities you're going to take, say a total of 42 days. And then on page, next page, page 7, it's a total of 53 days. So that I'm implying that means a total of 95 days in total for the work. Would it be helpful, or is it helpful to us as members to indicate the weighting of work within these? At the moment, I don't know what, are they in alphabetical order people thought of them? Is there some sort of rank ordering within your workload that would indicate to us as members that you've got to spend more time on that because you perceive that to be far higher priority than one lower down the list at all? I don't know, are they all of equal weight?
So we have a planning meeting with Mark and Charlotte and Rachel to discuss what the key areas are, the forthcoming areas, and it's funny because we were having that exact conversation about which areas do we cover, if we had to drop anything or we had to move anything around, and actually all of these are quite key for next year. So as far as about whether they're higher or lower risk or priority, they're probably all pretty much on a par with each other actually for this forthcoming year. But there is conversations that we will have during the year around things if things change. I mean, what we can do for a future plan is we could possibly put some form of ranking on them, which might help for a future plan, which we can certainly look to do that for next year. That would be yeah. If you find that helpful, we can do that for you.
I think a ranking and weighting order would be helpful to us as members to indicate where you see the issue, the amount of time, an issue of higher importance than something else when we're reviewing the outcome of your audit.
I mean, one thing I will say is what part of the reason for the increase in days is we've done a piece of work around the quality of data that comes in from the employers. So they had to fill out these monthly interfaces, which they on their care pay and their sort of for their staff. And we have had challenges with that. We've done a repeat piece of work this year and have had similar challenges. And so there's a big chunk of that plan is actually to carry on that work and do some more extensive work on that in the forthcoming year. So but yeah, but for future, yes, absolutely, we can do that for you. That's not a problem.
Thanks, Alexis. And that's noted. Fred's noted that. It's interesting to say that many of us were on the audit masterclass this week, so we're kind of buoyed with questions and are intrigued by how it all works. So great to be challenged on that. George.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I think it's a really good way to look at it is present it in by audit risk areas, because that's what we're actually addressing. So I've got sort of two questions really, have those audit risk areas changed compared to last year? And how does that how will that work out into the plan if it has? And secondly, you talked about the plan is flexible, which is a very good thing, but in that flex, will that come back in some form to this committee to approve, or is it delegated to officers?
I'm going to ask the second one first, if that's okay. As far as if there's anything significant that needs changing that we felt needs to come back to committee, then we would. But normally that would be something that would be done with agreement of Mark and Rachel, and we'd normally put that through the pension board just for information. We haven't done in the past about bringing a change to the plan back to the committee. I don't know how you feel about this, Mark or Rachel.
I think the timings are not always that conducive, but the pension, generally speaking, the committee gets the plan at this meeting to approve. We will then report to you at the next meeting on the outcome of all the audit work that was done during 25, 26. So there may be an opportunity then if we think that there is anything that needs tweaking to do that. But the pension board does, as Alexis says, monitor this at all of their meetings. So we tend to scrutinise that. And if there was an issue that needed to be addressed, then typically that could appear in the pension board minutes that then come to this meeting, and then we could do something off the back of that just to make sure you're aware.
And there was, sorry, Fred.
Sorry, I just wanted to add, just because me and Alexis had a conversation, a mistake I made, on the front sheet, I put this as a report of the Director of Finance and Public Value, just for noting it's ahead of Devon Assurance Partnership, so that was my mistake, just to stress the independence of the assurance partnership. Just so
Yeah.
that was on the record. And
It's to align with the global international audit standards.
Yeah, and I'll
So
reflect that in the minutes. I just wanted to put
that's
that on the
okay,
record.
that's fine. And the second question was asked about the risks. I'm going to again direct this back because I personally have not looked at the risk registers recently, because that's a different team that gets involved with the risks on the risk register. But all of the areas that we've had on the audit plan are all areas of risk for or emerging risks for the pension fund, because it's all, most of this is linked to changes. So it will come, there will be risks that will be associated with that, with any change. And some of this work is around preparing for change. So it's not necessarily, it may not have come in, but it's kind of how do we fare? Are we ready to go with this? So there's a bit of, sometimes we get a bit involved with the kind of those preliminary work to make sure that we are ready to go when the statute comes into play. So I don't know if there's anyone wants to add anything to that one.
Just to add to that, the programme changes every year. We aren't auditing the same things every year. We tend to have a rolling programme. So the things that are sort of high priority to be looked at, we would tend to look at every 3 to 4 years, say, on a rolling programme. And then if anything new comes on the scene, like McLeod, for example, then we will then add that into the programme and the specific risks around that. So again, this year with the change in investment pool, that's gone on the list because that then becomes more of a risk in terms of transitional arrangements. Access and fairness is a new regs that are coming out from government. So again, that introduces a new set of things that we need to just make sure that we're managing appropriately. So it's sort of like a combination of current issues with a sort of rolling programme of looking at the things that continue to be high priority.
George, are you happy with those answers? I think the answer to your first question is pretty comprehensive. And secondly, I don't think I think there's enough scrutiny that it doesn't require it coming back to this committee. Just want to check.
I'm satisfied with that. It's a matter of clarity, Chair, because I presume the plan as a whole, the audit plan as a whole, is dealt with by the audit committee. And pick up Fred's point that this is it is the responsibility of the head of internal audit. It's his plan. He has to do this, and obviously we have to be happy with it. And I think, sorry, that was just an aside, but I'm very happy. The only thing that I was really behind that asking was we're looking at an annual snapshot here, and I didn't get the overall picture of how that pans out over the years. So it's a very helpful comment.
Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the, it seems there's a slight sort of contradiction conceptually that we're internally auditing our actuaries or their work. They're an independent body and they should be so. So I'm concerned that if we're marking their homework, that sort of impinges to an extent on their independence, and also the sort of possibly a shift if they do muck up, then it's possibly a shift in sort of liability if we've gone in there and said that we're happy with something that they've done wrong. So I'm just wondering where we sit on that, because it doesn't feel like it's an internal audit going and looking at the work of an external body.
I can clarify that one. So we look at the process that the pension fund, our internal process. So the actuarial valuation takes place, that takes place. And there's a process that has to be followed. So there's things around consultation, around noted back about, member engagement, employer engagement, all that sort of stuff. And then you have the outcome of it is presented, and then there's some recommendations made about contributions, about things like might be some sort of funding, sort of the ways in which the pension fund is funded. There may need to be some changes there, and it's all around how are we then doing that internally. So have we then implemented what they've recommended? So there's nothing around the actual valuation itself. It's more on our internal process and have we followed the right protocols.
So, if I may, Chair, they remain a black box as far as this process is concerned.
Well, in theory, we need to understand what's in the black box, but we're not marking their homework as such. We're marking our homework in terms of our provision of data to them, to make sure that they've had all the appropriate data to put through their black box, and then the process for what we do with the outflows from the black box. Once we've got them, that's the key, really.
You have plenty of metaphors in your toolbox. George.
Yeah, I was going to say that every year the external auditors audit those actuarial assumptions. So give us as the council the assurance that the valuations are okay. So there's no the explanation is that, I guess, what I interpret, internal audit is looking at our processes where they interface with them, but the external auditors will be looking at the actuarial assumptions are reasonable and giving us assurance on that particular basis. So taken together.
There's two very simple words. Okay, so Devon internal audit will look at compliance. Not, there's a little bit of substantiation, but external audit there is compliance, but it's more around substantiating. Yeah, so I think that's probably that's I'd say the distinction between the two there. That helps.
No further questions? Okay, is anyone happy to propose Roberto? Someone to second? Mike, all in favour? Thank you. Okay, so we move on to agenda item 9. I have to say, when I had a meeting with Mark and Angie to discuss this meeting, they said it's going to be fairly straightforward. I've noted there are 14 decisions we've got to make today, so thank you for the reassurance on that. Okay, so item 9. The committee is asked to note the designation of the Assistant Director, Pensions and Investments as the Senior LGPS Officer, as will be required by the Local Government Pension Scheme Amendment Regulations Act 2026. Approve the revision of the specification for the independent advisor in accordance with the requirements for the appointment of an independent person as set out in section 4 of the report, and approve the undertaking of a procurement process to appoint an independent person. Just to note here, in terms of the of noting the designation of the Assistant Director of Pension Investments, it has been suggested that Mark may need to leave the room on this point. As we're just noting it, I'm going to suggest, unless anybody wants to discuss this in more detail, that Mark remains in the room because he's already been appointed. Roberto?
I'm just going to add that in the person of Mark, you have an excellent example of someone who's been in the business for a number of years, given sterling service, has the competent requirements that are necessary for the job, and therefore I think as a committee we ought to actually recognise that and not just rubber stamp him.
Thank you, that's noted, and by that I'm taking it that you're happy that he stays in the room. Thank you very much. Okay, let me hand over to Mark.
Okay, leaving that point aside, then Anthony has left the room because the rest of the report talks about the appointment of an independent person. So we currently have the services of Anthony through a contract with Apex Investment, but Anthony acts completely independently, but the Apex cover insurance for, so if we sued Anthony, if we thought he gave us bad advice, then he's got insurance to cover it. And so, but his advice is his advice, and it's not the company's advice, as it were. And equally, when we had Alistair Brown at our last meeting, then that was his advice, not the company's advice that he gives. Now, under the new regulations, we have to appoint an independent person, and that role is a wider role than currently Anthony fulfills. Anthony's chief responsibility currently is around investments and providing investment advice. The role going forward also needs to be able to advise around governance issues and around pension administration issues and cover the full works of what the committee is responsible for. So the current contract we have comes to an end in October. So we would be having to go out to undertake a procurement exercise anyway. So the proposal is that we go out to tender through a procurement process, but that we base the specification for the role on the new requirements of the new regs that are due to come in April, May, along with the pension schemes bill, which should come into law through Parliament in April, May, and we're expecting the regs to be laid before Parliament at the same time. So we will go out to tender. Tender evaluations will then be undertaken by officers. We will, under procurement rules, we can't involve members of the council in that process, but what we can do is that at the end of the process, we will make a recommendation, and the chair can then consider that recommendation and sign it off. So that is the proposal. Just as a bit of context, as I say, the current role is purely around investment, and that is Anthony's specialism. So in terms of going forward, if they want to retain the contract, then Anthony will need to provide evidence that he can advise on the full range of pension issues and not just investments. And equally, other bidders will be part of that process. So over to you.
Thanks, Mike.
Just two questions, Chair, for clarification. As you say, the job description is broadening, and I would have thought the field of expertise in this broader area is quite narrow to actually cover all capacities that are required within this. Is there ability to appoint more than one independent person to have distinct job descriptions within the roles? So in other words, you could have somebody who's an expert in the pension, somebody else on the investment, so you get two distinct sets of advice from two experts in their own fields. So that's question one. Secondly, if and when a person is appointed, can they also operate in other funds, or are they restricted to only operate within one pension fund?
Can I broaden that question slightly to ask, is an independent advisor, can that be a firm as opposed to two individuals?
So given that we're going through a procurement process, our expectation would be that it would be with a company, and you generally find that most advisors of this type will operate through a company of some sort. It may be a one-person company, but we need to make sure that tax implications and so on sorted out. It's not something generally where I would anticipate we could say appoint someone under a contract of employment. It would need to be a proper contract with a company. I think the points that you raise are very valid in terms of being able to find someone that has the spread of knowledge and experience required to cover the full works. Something that we will consider very closely. It is sort of more akin to appointing, say, a professional trustee type person, is the way that the government has couched it. I think we need to be very clear in terms of capacity to undertake the role, but most of the advisors that we are aware of do provide, as does Anthony, advice to more than one fund. So we wouldn't impose that as a restriction, but we would need to be very clear about the capacity to be able to do the job for us.
Any further questions? Yes, Carl.
Thank you. Yeah, just looking at paragraph 4.3 and 4.4, and I appreciate this is a statutory process, so it'll have to be what it'll be. But a lot of 4.3 seems to be contributing, if you like, to the work of the committee, which loosely put you can call the executive function in terms of this, the decision-making function. And then 4.4 is about how the chair of the local pension board, which is much more the scrutiny come audit function, is given. And I'm just wondering how, whether it's an individual or a firm, someone is going to be able to do that, because it does feel like there is an element of marking your own homework. If you are happy and comfortable with what it is that the committee is doing in relation to its role, you're going to find it very difficult critically challenging that at the pension board, because ultimately you've already endorsed it. Equally, if you're unhappy with it, then you're creating a kind of a tension. I don't know how someone independently supports the work of the committee and the work of the board.
I would not see this as somebody who is going to attend pension board meetings. I mean, it's all in how you interpret the regulations going forward. My view would be that that there would need to be a dialogue facilitated between the chair of the pension board and the independent person, that would be about perhaps briefing the chair of the pension board from time to time, providing support in terms of knowledge and skills, maybe. So I don't see it as someone who's going to come along to pension board meetings and then provide, because I think there would be an inherent conflict of interest. So I think it's about providing support to that person as an individual to enable them to fulfil their function to the best of their ability at the pension board.
I think I'm right that the wording we've got here is the sort of wording that's coming out of government, and that's probably for us then to define the processes that we think will operate correctly. And your point's been noted and will be in the minutes, and I think that's something that Mark will be able to pick up in the future. So thank you for that. Any further questions? Okay, so I think I'm going to lump Part B and Part C into one decision here. So the first part is to approve the revision of the specification for the independent advisor and to approve the undertaking of a procurement process to appoint an independent person. Is someone happy to propose this? Jeff and Simon second. All in favour? Okay, thank you. It was ominously quiet as you walked in, wasn't it? Yeah. What could possibly have happened? Okay. So we move on. Item 10, investment pooling arrangements. Mark is going to speak to this. I'd just like to say that we have the document from Osborne Clark, which is in your packs in orange. There's a slight error because agenda item 11 is also in orange and shouldn't be. So that is not part of this. But if anybody intends to make reference to this appendix, we would need to take that comment into part 2 away from being online and potentially in front of the press. So if you do intend to make a comment on this document, can you please ensure that we don't discuss it, because we'd have to take it into part 2. Okay, Mark.
Yes, so the report sets out the issues that need to be agreed by the committee in order to facilitate moving from the Brunel pool to the LPPI pool. So back in September, the committee made the in-principle decision to join the LPPI pool. This report is now recommending the committee to formally approve that the Devon Fund become a shareholder in the LPPI pool. The final version of the shareholder agreement is not yet available, but the content is summarised in the report at a high level. Osborne Clark have provided legal advice to the 9 LGPS funds that will become shareholders, and that is the subject of the confidential document within the pack. And as has already been said, if you wish to raise points from that document, then we would need to go into confidential sessions. The setup of LPPI is different to the setup of Brunel. So in Brunel's case, we have a company with a board that is FCA approved, and then they are accountable back to us. With LPPI, they have a separate layer to the governance arrangements, so that the operating company, equivalent to the Brunel company, is a subsidiary of a holding company, which will be called LPPI Holdings Limited. And the governance arrangements for that are that each of the 9 shareholders will appoint a director to LPPI Holdings Limited. So that will give us a more direct input into the decision-making process. So there is the requirement to appoint a representative to the board, and there are proposals in the report about that. The report also summarises the advisory management agreement that will need to be put in place, which sets out what services LPPI will provide to the Devon Fund and what our responsibilities are. this is summarised in the report. We're still tweaking the final advisory management agreement, and so we are asking the committee to approve that we enter into an advisory management agreement. But then recommendation D asks the committee to provide delegated authority to officers to finalise the detail of both these agreements and take any other actions necessary to effect a transition to LPPI. Just to say on that, as I said, the setup of LPPI is different to Brunel. So this is a structure that wasn't in place at Brunel. With Brunel, we as we have been familiar with, there is an oversight board at which the chair of our committee is a member, along with the equivalents from the other Brunel shareholding funds, and we also have 2 scheme member representatives on that board, that oversight board. Now, we are looking at setting up a similar oversight board for LPPI that is separate to the arrangements in this document, and that is something that that we haven't fully resolved yet, but that is something that we are intending to push through. There is a proposed initial meeting, not of the formal oversight board in the sense that Brunel has been, but LPPI are proposing to hold a meeting on the 28th of April. And the suggestion is that they're expecting us to have 5 people from each of the participating fund going to that, which would include the people who potentially might be on the more formal oversight board when it's created, and that's something that would be on the agenda for that session. So we will need to give some thought as to who those 5 people are, in addition to the things that the recommendations that are actually on the agenda paper. That's something that we've sort of been exploring over the last few days. So my suggestion is that probably the chair and maybe the vice chair should represent us as 2 of the 5 members. I would need to be there, and we could also invite the chair of the pension board and maybe 1 other person to go. So that, I think, something that we will need to consider. I don't think it needs to be part of a formal resolution. So that's where we stand in terms of the formulation of LPPI. As it says, it's proposing to appoint the senior LGPS officer, which would be me as director. If you want to discuss that and want me to leave the room for that part of the discussion, I'm happy to do that as well. But then, in addition, we also need to undertake such tasks as are necessary to effect the wind down of the Brunel company. Now, Angia Section 151 officers acted as the shareholder representative, and there are issues that from time to time need to be subject of reserved matters or special reserve matters that Angie has the delegated authority to decide, and it's proposed that transfer over to me just for the interim period until Brunel is shut down, to have perhaps a slightly more hands-on approach, and particularly given Angie's retirement, it seemed to make sense. So again, if that's something you want to discuss and you want me to leave the room, if you're concerned about my personal involvement in that, but I think these are part of the role that I fulfill. So over to you.
Okay, I mean, yeah, well, let's just dive in. I've got something to say, but yeah. Let me just very briefly run through this. So we've got 6 things to consider here. So I think Mark has explained this quite succinctly and quite well, and I think the document summarises that. I did speak to the Director of Legal and Democratic Services earlier this morning about the aspects of delegation. Now, she is next door in the Clinton room, and she has volunteered to come out of that meeting and come in here should we feel we need to know more about that delegation process or understand it. I'm pretty comfortable with it, and as Roberto eloquently said earlier on, I think we have a lot of faith in Mark's capability, but I will take questions. Jeff.
Can I just comment on the delegation bit? So D is the thing that delegates down. When we formed Brunel many moons ago, it feels like now, the decision did go to full council in terms of the shareholding in Brunel, but at the time, and I'm sure Maria would also explain this, at the time the council then delegated all matters to do with investment pooling of the pension fund to the committee. So therefore you do have the delegated ability to do this. This is then asking you to further delegate the nitty gritty, if you like, to officers, you having made the in principle strategic decisions.
Jeff.
Thank you very much, Chair. With regards to delegation, I've got faith in the suggestions it's made, but it's just a point on the shareholder agreement 3.6, because it's around, yeah. So it says each shareholder will be required to provide regulatory capital to meet the requirements of the Financial Conduct Authority around 3 million. I don't like around, I like straight figures, so there should be a figure there. But when we first started this process, I think we were informed that it might be 1 million, it might be 2 million, and now we're up to 3 million. And then on top of that, I'd ask how much is it costing with regards to the handover of Brunel from this, because there's got to be an extra cost to that. So where this government have pushed us into this process, I'm not blaming anybody here, but it's the government that pushed us into this process. We are taking funds out of our funds to pay for something that we've been forced to do. And I think the government should be paying the bill. Let's put it that way. And it's not just for this committee, it's for all the pension holders, all those people out there who are paid into their pension. It's their money. And this is what really gets under my skin. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jeff. And I think when you say you're not blaming anyone there, I think you are. I think we're all quite roundly blaming the Labour government for that. So let's put that on the record. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, so as LPPI is a company regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority, they have to maintain a certain level of capital, otherwise they would not be authorised by the FCA to provide investment services. So that is why that is a requirement. That there is a calculation around that, which is still in process. The latest figure I have is 2.8 million rather than 3. So hence we don't know the precise figure with any certainty until the full calculation is done, which is all based around the value of the assets that they will be managing, and hence it's a bit of a moving feast. But they have to have sufficient regulatory capital to effectively provide a bit of a buffer over and above what the minimum requirement would be. We did the same with Brunel. When Brunel was formed, we provided regulatory capital. We actually then would value that as an asset in our accounts, that our shareholding would reflect the value of the regulatory capital that the firm has. So effectively, it's still sort of within the fund, even though we've paid it over. It would still be within our accounts as an asset. When Brunel finally winds up, we would expect to get some level of regulatory capital back from Brunel potentially, but that will depend significantly on some of the wind down costs. So they will have contracts that they have to terminate early, which will still need a payment to be made. Equally, they have staff that will be being made redundant, and then there will be costs of that as well. it would be just worth me saying at this point that a number of staff from Brunel have secured jobs with LPPI. LPPI will continue looking to continue to provide a base. Their main base is in London, but they will continue to provide an office in Bristol. And I am aware, for example, I think I can say it's public knowledge that 2 members of the responsible investment team from Brunel have joined LPPI. Faith Ward, who is the Chief Responsible Investment Officer, is likely to act on some sort of consultancy basis rather than as a direct employee of LPPI. And equally, 2 members of the client relationship team have also joined LPPI or will be joining LPPI. And there are a number of others as well, but I don't know the detail of that, and that's not publicly known yet. So that gives us a little bit of continuity in terms of some of the things that have been important to us as a fund.
I think what we're saying is we share your frustration, Jeff, on this. I attended the last Bob meeting, and I mentioned this to Mark and Angie, but the professionalism with which the Brunel staff are operating right now is hugely impressive, and they're to be commended for that. But this is a situation we're in. Nobody's to blame, as you've said. I've got Mike's, but I'll just ask Mike. Mike, please.
Thank you, Chair. One very specific point and 2 general points of information, as I hope doesn't intrude over the orange pages. In regard to, you were saying about 5 representatives on a board of grouping, and you suggested chair, vice chair, I think it was yourself as a third, and then a representative of the pension board. Could I suggest that if there is a 5th space, there should be an employee representative, I think, there to balance the team up. That's my view on that specific point on the group of 5 who have to sit on the board that was mentioned. In relation to the transition and the arrangements here, is it likely that the structures that are different than the one we're operating in at the moment with Brunel are in place, or are these transitional arrangements where you see the company, the new pension board or pension body evolving as time goes on? And in relation to that, I noticed that we've got 1 director, will appoint 1 director. Is there a weighting in the voting structure in this that gives weight to the size of the funds that we are transferring into the new body? Because that's I'm unclear about.
We've always operated through Brunel, and the proposal is the same LPPI as 1 member, 1 vote, essentially. So each fund is equally represented, regardless of the size of the fund. With Brunel, we've actually been the largest fund. Sort of between us and Avon, at some points they've been higher and some points we've been higher, depending on investment returns. But I think we're the highest at the moment. With LPPI, we won't be the highest because Lancashire and LPPFA are both bigger than us, and they are the existing shareholders. But they are equally happy that we continue on a 1 fund, 1 vote basis. So that will be equal. Yeah, the meeting I referred to is sort of a fairly informal meeting. So this is just for the 1 meeting, and then we will resolve the formal structures going forward after that. I think there was another question in there that I haven't answered. So the shareholders, yeah, the shareholders agreement is an important document because effectively what's set out in it will be difficult to amend, let's put it that way. So I think the governance structures as currently set out will go forward. They can be added to, and indeed the issue I said about the oversight board is something that isn't in there at the moment, and will be something that can be added. I think that inevitably there will be some sort of suck it and see around this, that it is different from what we've been used to with Brunel. The government regulations mean it has to be different, and even if we continued with Brunel, we would have had to change some of the way it worked. So I think that there's going to be some sort of evolution as we progress.
George.
Thank you. Most of my point largely covered, but there was just one, returning to section 3.6 about the £3 million, and Mark was talking about a return of the capital, regulatory capital from Brunel, but didn't give a sort of a feeling of how much that would be. I don't know if it's possible, even possible to do
I
that.
don't think I can give that figure at the moment. The key costs around this, and something that Jeff alluded to and I didn't particularly pick up on, is around the asset transition. And at the moment, for the most part, the intention is that what we've got with Brunel will just be passed across to LPPI to manage in exactly the same as it is now. But that will evolve too, because particularly under the Fit for the Future requirements, the way that we set asset allocation will change slightly. They will then be the source of advice for that as well. But when we have the Brunel session at the end of this committee meeting, that we usually have, that the steer that they've got for that session is that we won't be talking about their investment performance, because almost there's not much they can do about it now. But what they're going to do is they're going to go through what the current status is in terms of the plan to transition our investment assets across to the new pool. So they will address that element of it at that point.
Could I just express my ignorance here? I would have thought, please describe why I'm wrong, that's what I really want to, that Brunel complies with the same FCA regulations as the new company does. So I would think that the regulatory capital required by us in the new one and the old Brunel would do the same. So why is this extra £3? So obviously I'm wrong. I just want to understand why.
No, it depends on the level of assets that they are managing. So Brunel, the value of assets managed by Brunel, albeit they are managing assets for 10 funds and LPPI will only actually be 9 funds. Nevertheless, the average size of the funds at LPPI is higher, so there will be a higher level of assets under management that LPPI will be managing, and therefore they need a higher level of regulatory capital than Brunel currently do.
I'm going to take 2 more questions. We've got Carl and then Jeff.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got one question which is straightforward and 2 which might touch upon the confidential aspect. So if you're comfortable to come back to those when we've concluded the other discussion, or I can frame them in very general terms, whichever is your preference, such that you can decide whether or not it does require a confidential session. I'm in your hands.
Let's see if you can ask your question without referring.
Yes.
Otherwise, we'll need to go to a vote to take it to section 2. So
I'll come to those in very general terms. The simple question is in relation to paragraphs D and E, which are the delegations to the Director of Finance and Public Value and the Director of Legal and Democratic Services. Would I be right in making the assumption that that is a joint delegation? In other words, technically both will be signing off on that, rather than an either or, because it's relatively unusual to delegate to either A or B to make the same decision. So is it joint or individual delegations where either can make the same decision without reference to the other, please?
I think there are pension fund and financial aspects to this, and there are legal aspects to this. So they'll sign off as appropriate is what I would suggest.
Do it jointly.
Yeah. Cool.
So when we have delegations that are to 2 or more officers, it typically requires both or all of the statutory officers to agree.
Thank you, very helpful. And then two questions. First one in very general terms. Having read the report and the appendix, are we reassured that the advice that we have received, which is very good in terms of quantitative, you know, this is what is involved, provides us with a qualitative basis, which effectively is a recommendation to proceed on this basis?
So just to explain the process a bit more. So the shareholders agreement has been put together on behalf of LPPI by Eversheds. So Osborne Clarke are acting purely on behalf of the 9 pension funds. There has been significant discussions between Osborne Clarke and Eversheds, and indeed between Osborne Clarke and us as the 9 funds around the content, and Osborne Clarke have gone back on a number of points and negotiated changes to certain conditions in the original draft that was put together by Evershed. So they are purely acting on our behalf. So yes, I would take that as a firm recommendation.
Thank you very much. And then finally, and thank you for your indulgence, Chairman, and to the meeting. In relation to the situation where we appoint a representative to the board, and so item we've got item B there, they become a board member. In the instance where they are a member of staff of the pension fund, is their remuneration picked up through job evaluation in the pension fund, or is it, am I misunderstanding? Sorry.
So the situation is that the directors are not remunerated, apart from there is an independent chair provided for in the board, but the individual directors of the board are not remunerated. If the committee decided that they wanted to appoint someone that needed remuneration, then that would need to come from our pension fund, because there's no provision for that role to be remunerated. So
thank you. I've clearly misunderstood the information. I can pick that up separately afterwards. Thank you.
Jeff.
Thanks, Chair. With reference to Councillor Mitchell's request for a member of the fund to be included, which I'll go along with, I'll suggest that the union and retired member be that 5th member, because I feel that covers all the areas within the pension holders, and it would be met, especially with the union side of things.
Yeah, that's noted, Jeff. Yeah, tend to agree with you. Okay. Now we have 6 separate points here. I'm minded to take them all as one item. If we're in agreement, if anybody has a problem with that, then let me know now, but I'm okay. So let's take them all as one item. Somebody prepared to propose this? Simon and Mike, you happy to second? Mike, happy to second? Okay, all in favour, please. Okay, that's carried. Thank you. Okay, so we move to item number 11, the investment management report. No decision. This is just for noting. Over to Mark.
yes, so this is the regular report that we provide, updating on where our investments are as at the end of the quarter. So the table on pages 47 to 48 shows the current value of the funds split between asset classes, with the allocation of each asset class compared to the target allocation. And as at the 31st of December, the fund value stood at 6.84 billion, which represented a total fund return of 2.3% over the quarter and a return of plus 11.6% over the financial year to date. If we get another 2.5% quarter we're currently in, that might just about get us to 7 billion by the end of the financial year, which would be good. But but no guarantees. Um, Following the rebalancing undertaken during October and November, the overweight to equities has reduced. It does remain 1.6% over target, but is now within 2%, which is sort of the rule of thumb that we use around rebalancing. Sterling corporate bonds, multi-asset credit and index-linked gilts and cash are all at or slightly above the target allocation. So we are not proposing any further rebalancing at this point. That's particularly an issue with the assets being due to transition to LPPI from April onwards. It would complicate things if we started trying to move things around as that process is undertaken. The graph towards the bottom of page 67 shows investment performance over the last quarter, 3 and 5 years compared to the fund benchmark and the local government pension scheme average. The fund benchmark is a weighted average of the benchmarks for each of the individual asset classes, and while the fund's investment performance is below that benchmark over each of those periods, it is ahead of the LGPS average over all periods except the last quarter. The underperformance against benchmark is largely due to the active equity portfolios, with the exception of emerging markets, which has outperformed. Again, this is reflective of the fact that the market has been dominated by those big AI tech companies, and it's actually quite difficult for active managers to be over invested in those, which means that many active managers have underperformed, not just the ones that Brunel are using. Section 4 of the report provides an update on our funding level, showing that the estimated funding level has increased from the 100% that we showed at the triennial valuation to 104% as at the end of December. And that's largely a result of the investment return that we've achieved since the 31st of March 2025. When they do these updated funding valuations, they don't do the full works that they do for the triennial. They roll forward effectively a lot of the data, and then they just apply revised assumptions and apply the cash flows and investment returns that we've had since the valuation. Section 6 shows the cash management over the quarter. We have been holding higher levels of cash, and we were going to consider looking at other liquidity solutions where we've got cash waiting to go into private markets, and that was something that we will need to take up with the new pool once we've gone through the transition period. And then the final section of the report shows voting and engagement activity over the last quarter. We had one voting alert from the Local Authority Pension Fund Forum to support a shareholder resolution calling for more transparent reporting by Microsoft on the human rights impact of their activities. Now, Legal and General Investment Management vote our passive shares, and their default position was to vote against the resolution on the basis that their belief was that Microsoft were already taking action. But on this occasion, Brunel instructed LGIM to vote their shares differently from the core of LGIM's shares to support this resolution. So it just shows that Brunel has had an active role in influencing the way the votes are conducted. Now, the vote was still lost, which tends to be the case where management oppose shareholder resolutions, but the fact that around a quarter of investors or shareholders voted for the resolution will still give Microsoft some sort of incentive to understand that it is an issue of concern that they need to be continuing to address. So happy to take any questions.
I'll take a couple. I'll take 3 questions because this is for noting and we've got other stuff to get on with. But Roberto.
First of all, it's very nice to see that the fund is still doing well. Considering that we have been criticised in the media very recently about the inefficiency of local government investments, I think we ought to actually publicise the fact that we are very efficient, and we don't see why long term the government should take over or the city should take over running our pension funds. It's our money, we put it in. And the second thing is that I'm particularly interested in the way LAP and the other organizations like Brunel are looking into those sort of areas where we need to make sure that a greener agenda, if you like, is actually activated. And although I'm disappointed with some of the answers that businesses have given, I think on the whole, pursuing it this way is a commendable thing for the fund to be doing. So I'm hoping that this will be continued in the LPPPI.
Thank you, Roberto.
My earlier comments, which happened offline as far as this meeting is concerned, I hasten to add. So in an earlier chart, and I'll describe it briefly, we saw the significant outperformance of US tech stocks compared to the US market. And what that means is that US tech stocks have grown to represent a bigger and bigger share of the US market by capitalization, and therefore being a bigger and bigger driver of its performance and will remain so in either direction. Given that we are significantly exposed to the US and significantly exposed to passive funds, I mean, this is a very useful high-level review of our performance, but I'm just wondering about the level of visibility we have on the specific exposure to the Magnificent Seven and other US equities through our managers.
Anthony might want to comment as well, but I mean, it's essentially passive will be heavily exposed to the big tech stocks. I'm sure Anthony can quote what proportion of the market they are. I can't off the top of my head, but it is quite large. And interestingly, our exposure to them through the fund, the passive fund that we have, is because we've invested in a climate aware fund that takes into account data on emissions into account, and it includes a number of exclusions. So all companies would not be part of that because of the exclusions that are in place. Effectively, if you take things out of the index, then everything else sort of gets a slightly bigger share. So from that point of view, we've probably had an even bigger share than a core global index, which has benefited us up to this point. But I think one of the decisions that we made when we did say that we did agree to reduce our equity allocations was that we would reduce the passive and we would keep the active as it was. Now the active has underperformed, so if you were basing that on the past history, which is never a good guide to future returns, you would say, well, we should cut the active because they're not doing very well. But if we get to the point where the big tech companies start losing value, then actually having a higher proportion in actively managed may at that point then start to be more in our favor. One of the things that we will need to discuss very carefully, and have started discussing with LPPI, is the approach that they take to rebalancing and making sure that we're keeping to our target allocations. At the moment, that's our decision. If we think we're too much overweight on anything, then we will tell Brunel to sell and invest it elsewhere. In future, under the Fit for the Future proposals from government, that will be the pool's decision rather than ours. Having said that, we still need to provide effective scrutiny to the pools, to the LPPI pool. Just to say on that front that from the next meeting, we would expect them to come along and do the slot that Brunel have done in the past, and then we can hold them to account through that route. But certainly it's something that we need to keep a close eye on and make sure that they do start taking forward some of the things that we were expecting Brunel to take forward, which have been put on hold, which would then enable us to perhaps prune our equity allocation a little bit further.
Anthony, do you happen to have those figures?
Whilst Mark has been talking, it's given me the opportunity to dive into the Brunel report, which is in the other meeting pack. And on that report on index page 35 is the Global High Alpha Equity Fund, which is one of our active investments, which is managed for us by Brunel. And I'm just looking at the numbers there because I couldn't actually remember them off the top of my head. If we look at the regional allocation in the index of which I believe is the MSCI, Americas are 73.9% of the global index. And the High Alpha Fund has a 64% exposure to Americas. So they are actually 10% underweight the Americas in this one active fund. If you look at the sector distribution on the right hand side, you can see that the information technology, which is predominantly where the Magnificent Seven sit, that's the weight is 26.5 compared to 27.1 for the index. So the fund is, the active position of the fund is to be underweight the US by about 10%, but neutral the technology sector. And if you look in the, naturally enough, they've got the top 5 holdings because of the size of these assets actually are predominantly the Mag 7. Although I should point out that Taiwan Semiconductor is not a Mag 7 company, and it is the 3rd largest position in this portfolio. And it is the largest active overweight, but that's because Taiwan is not part of the global index. It's part of a different index. So yes, there is a lot of exposure to the US, but it's less than the benchmark, and the technology exposure is roughly neutral to index. So if the Magnificent Seven were to have a difficult period, this portfolio would have some impact from that outcome.
If I could just add to that, though, I think it's true to say that the technology investments of that particular fund are slightly broader than the Mag 7. And so they've got a number of smaller technology companies in there to bring up the weight. So that has helped to bring down the actual weight to the Mag 7.
That's also true. Unfortunately, I can't see that from this particular report. But I mean, it's a very, very reasonable concern. But I think the point that Mark made earlier is we have adjusted the strategic allocation of the fund to be more resilient against this, not least against this risk, but also because of income requirements for the fund, and because bonds look more attractive than they have done in the past. And the point that actually Mark very brought out was that we are actively rebalancing these positions. So as we get the excess performance from equity, we trim it, and that's if you like the nudge on the tiller on the direction that the super tanker is taking, if you follow that analogy.
Let's take a follow-up question from Henry, and then we'll close. Did you want to come back, Simon? If you can briefly come back, and then we'll go to Henry.
Given Councillor Gent's desire to follow me, I might as well get. So I also think it's important to recognise that the alternative to equities is not necessarily bonds. It might just be other equities, and that we could look at sort of themes such as quality stocks and dividend paying stocks as an alternative if we are seeking to rebalance. I don't think it's a case necessarily. I think there will be a correction. I don't think the 7 samurai will become the 7 dwarves by any means, but I think that it could be. So I think that, so to that, given that, I just wonder to what extent the sort of themed semi-passive investments, such as if you were looking for yield stocks, for dividend paying stocks, will be available through LPPI as a tool for rebalancing within the equity compartment.
That's something that we will need to give attention to going forward. In theory, going forward under the new regulations, that's not in our gift to be able to flex within equities. That is in the gift of the pool to decide that on our behalf. But we can express our preferences to them, and again, that's something that's evolving. At the moment, we've agreed with them that they will just take over what we've got as it is, but there will be an evolution of that to different funds. They have their own products, so there will need to be some sort of merging of the Brunel products that move over or that will become LPPI products with what they've got as existing, because they won't want to maintain everything that they've got now. And when they do that, that's something we're going to have to just be very clear with them on what our preferences are around that, to make sure that we're heard.
Just on the point of other styles, the fund does have global small cap, because that's pointing in a different direction. It has emerging equity as well, which is again drilling into a different area. And we also have an exposure to what's badged sustainable, and certainly at the moment, the sustainable bit of the portfolio should be doing better from the idea of value and growth, quality possibly, but equally the direction of the future of technology. So there is a bit of a style bias. Well, it's not style bias. There is a blend of styles available. Mark, does make a point that in terms of the vehicles which are available to us in the future, we will be driven by the implementation that LPPI choose to take. What we need to do is scrutinise the decisions which they're taking and ask the questions to why you think that's the right thing. But we also need to be quite clear about what our investment beliefs are in telling them how we would like them. It's like, unfortunately, we can't tell them directly we want this distribution of assets, but we can, through our investment beliefs and through that scrutiny, get them to where we want them to be. But,
and I think also that is going to be much more important in the period ahead, bearing in mind the issues that you raised, that at a time when markets are going up, then often there's a momentum about that. And with the small cap investment that we've got, for example, the portfolios are very, very biased towards those quality type companies that you're talking about. But that has actually not achieved over the last few months, because investors have piled money in and have gone for what's cheap, in the expectation that what's cheap will go up, rather than actually looking at the quality characteristics of those companies. And so our investments have not succeeded so well on that front. But if you get into more choppy waters, then that's when hopefully that would come to the fore.
Okay, Henry.
Thank you, Chair. I get it that we shouldn't, it's not practical to rebalance between now and the 1st of April. After the 1st of April, when it's all under LPPI, can we still rebalance to our current targets, or are they going to be saying, no, you've got to recategorize everything into vehicles that they've defined? Because I would like you to rebalance as soon as you can, because I share the view that was expressed prior to the meeting in the briefing that we might be in line for a correction. So I'd like to be able to rebalance, and that is our target. Will we be able to do that? Thank you.
So I think we are in an evolving landscape, and so we will need to have reviewed and restated our investment strategy statement and strategic asset allocation to fit the government's template in the new regulations by October. So we will be, I suggest, probably bringing a report back to this committee at the next meeting on how we do that. But within that, we can still express some preferences. Now, until that point, they still need to manage our strategic asset allocation as it is set currently. As I said, in theory, the rebalancing decisions are now with them and not with us, but I've already been in discussion with them about the fact that some of the bounds that they seem to be setting around were rather wide, and my view on that was, well, if you're going to set them that wide, you're never going to do anything. And if you're setting yourself up as professional fund managers of our resources, then I would expect you to be making those decisions. And I think we've agreed with them now that, yeah, we need a bit closer bounds to our strategic asset allocation. So it is something that we will be pressing them on. And you can press them on it when they come at the end of June.
I just want to come back very quickly and say I think the end of June's too far away. But I'm reassured that you are urging them you will be encouraging them to go towards our targets. Thank you.
Yes, I think the summary is there. Let's make sure our voice is heard. So that is item 11, and make a point of order, make it quick.
I'd just like to point out that, if you're a member of a group, as we will be of LPPI, we should think of it as us rather than them. We are part of it, or we will be part of it. And I think it's important not to sort of say, oh, they're doing this, we are doing it. And I think we should embrace that.
Thank you. Okay, so that's item 11 noted. Let's move on to item 12, triennial valuation and funding strategy statement. There is a decision required here. We're being asked to approve and adopt the funding strategy statement as set out in Appendix 1 to the report. Mark.
Yes, I'm hoping this might be more straightforward. So the report summarises the responses received from employers to the consultation on the funding strategy statement and recommends the committee approve the funding strategy statement as attached. We brought this the statement to you in draft form in September, and you agreed at the time that it was approved as a basis to go out to consultation. So it sets out the fund's policies on the approach to the triennial valuation, setting employer contribution rates and how we deal with exiting employers and other related issues. So we only had 5 responses from individual employers, which was disappointing, but the responses we had were broadly positive, and we can infer that other employers had no particular concerns that they wished to raise. We had an overarching representation from the Department for Education on behalf of academy trusts and further education colleges, essentially aiming to ensure that they were being treated on an equivalent basis to other public sector employers, and we are confident that this is the case. Some funds have treated academies and particular further education colleges as being higher risk, and therefore computing their contribution rates on a lower risk basis, which means the contribution rates are slightly higher, but we have not done that, and we have stated that in our response to them. So apart from a few minor tweaks to wording, there have been no changes made to the version that was approved by the committee in September as the basis for the consultation. Just to say also that all employers have now been provided with their contribution rates for the next 3 years.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. It's a big document, but are we all happy? But then there are going to be any questions. Would somebody like to propose this, please? Simon, somebody second. Jeff, all in favour? Okay. Item 13, the conflicts of interest policy. Again, decision required here. We're being asked to approve the conflicts of interest policy as set out in item 13, appendix 1. Yeah, over to Mark.
Yes, so up to now, the pension fund has piggybacked on Devon County Council's conflict of interest policies, with non-Devon County Council members of the committee and pension board expected to comply. However, the new regulations due to come into force during April and May will require the pension fund to have its own conflicts of interest policy. The draft policy sets out specific areas of potential conflict for the pension fund, in addition to the council's broader conflicts of interest policy. It will mean that we will need to maintain a separate register of interest for the pension fund and pension board committee members, in addition to the council's register. But it should be supplementary and complementary to the county council's current policies. We are therefore asking the committee to approve the conflict of interest policy. And again, this is something that Barnett Waddingham have helped us with putting this together. I think there is probably minimal addition to what's actually in the county council's current requirements, but it does mean a little bit of extra bureaucracy, and that we'll have to maintain a separate version. But I think most of it will be pretty much the same as what's in place now.
Okay, thank you. Are there any comments? Yes, Roberto.
I don't normally comment on the spelling, but under item 4, paragraph 4.1, it makes a mockery of what has actually been stated, because this policy was not complementary, it's complementary.
Thank you, many apologies.
Thank you for our Italian contingent and pointing that out. I'm sure we'll get that changed. We've got Michael online.
Just a quick one, because unless I've missed it, but just to obviously raise the fact that on its examples of potential and actual conflicts of interest, there's a board or committee member with close relatives who are scheme members, and obviously some of us are scheme members anyway. So just would it be worth clarifying that, because otherwise it makes it seem that multiple members have a automatic conflict of interest.
I think that's probably just something to be aware of. I don't think that's going to have any practical impact.
No, I doubt it would, but I thought I'd raise it just in case if it did.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Yeah, I think we'll note that, and that will be in the minutes as well. Okay, thank you. Any additional comments? Okay, got somebody who prepared to move this? Mike, seconder. Roberto, all in favour? It's carried, thank you. Okay, item 14, the fund member survey. 2 decisions required here. Well, firstly to note the results of the survey, but secondly to approve that the results of the survey be forwarded to the fund's pool company LPPI for consideration. Mark.
Yes, so last September, the committee agreed to undertake a survey of the views of pension fund members on the way that we manage the fund's investments, and this report summarises the results. So a total of 5,223 members responded 2,008 online and 3,215 via post, with the postal respondents being largely pensioners, which skewed the profile compared to the total membership. Despite this imbalance, the survey found little difference between online and postal responses on investment-related questions. Across the results, members strongly reaffirmed the fund's fiduciary duty to maximise long-term returns at an appropriate level of risk, with over 75% rating this as very important or of significant importance, and many identifying it as the top priority. Members also attributed importance to environmental, social and governance factors such as climate change, human rights and responsible business practices, although it has to be said the scores were slightly lower than in 2022 when we last did the survey. Keeping investment management fees low was rated more highly than some of those ESG considerations, implying continued support for maintaining a significant passive investment allocation, which lowers costs. Views on controversial investments were mixed. Attitudes towards fossil fuels were actually relatively balanced, with only slightly more people being negative than positive, whereas there were clear majorities against investment linked to controversial weapons, tobacco, and companies violating international law. Although there was a difference between controversial weapons and conventional weapons. Both were not liked, but not quite to the same extent. I think there was some comments around needing to support our defence industry to some extent, given the state of global state of things at the moment. The results, I think the results indicate a broad support for the fund's current investment approach, which seeks to balance responsible investment with our fiduciary obligations. Awareness of fund policies has improved among online respondents, although postal respondents remain less informed, highlighting the need for more inclusive communication channels, although we understand clearly that it does cost more and it is more difficult, but we do need to make sure that we can continue to involve those who are not electronically minded. The survey outcomes will need to be shared with LPPI. Brunel always made always had a strong reputation on responsible investment issues, and we need to make sure that that is maintained with LPPI. Whether there is any need to change our individual policies, I think broadly speaking, this supports the approach that we have, but we do need to make sure that we shape the future stewardship priorities of the new pool and ensure alignment with our responsible investment expectations. So again, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I think it's quite interesting that it was a lot of pensioners who were responding to the postal aspect of this, because that was the more expensive bit. Is this survey going to be tabled, should we be here, in 2028? Is it a survey that's done every 3 years?
Well, the 2022 survey was the first time that we had done it. It was when we did it then, I think it was done partly because we were getting a lot of interest from pension fund members who wanted, and we needed to find a way of gauging views more effectively. Equally, it's part of the stewardship code is to understand what the views of your fund members are, and part of us being signatories to the UK Stewardship Code suggested that we needed to do this. So back in 2022, we agreed that we should do it every 3 years, essentially. So hence why we've done it again in 2025. And so the expectation would be that, yes, we would do another one in probably 2028.
Yes, Carl.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to express appreciation to the committee and to officers for the survey, and in particular going down the paper route. I know we had a wide-ranging discussion about it in September and the cost benefit that goes with it. I think this shows that it is still a valuable way of linking into some of our members and some of our stakeholders. So thank you all very much.
I think if going back to the 2028 question, if we do this again, then if we are posting it out, then we'll need to work out a better way of dealing with the responses when they come back, because this my team has spent an awful lot of time inputting these surveys that have come back by post, and I think we were quite surprised by the number that actually came back, and we're not readily resourced to be able to handle that. So I think we will need to think about how we handle that next time.
Let's go with Roberta and then Simon.
Yeah, I wish to continue on Carl's thank you for doing it. It shows quite remarkable affinity to what the committee has been doing. But I think the most important thing is that we are able to demonstrate that of our 100,000 odd people inside the fund, 5.2%, which is a very high proportion, have actually bothered to respond and actually make it clear that they take a very important view of how the fund should be run. So I think if we need to justify it at any stage to anybody, including LPPI, we've got something solid there that no one can come back to us and say you haven't taken into account the views of members.
Thank you. Simon.
Thank you. I share much of what's been said already. I'm concerned, and I realise that this is partly structural, but a good third of the total membership are deferred members. That's, I understand, people who are working elsewhere now, or are outside the workforce, etc. And they make up a tiny fraction of total responses compared to their membership of the broader pool. And I think there's a wider problem of people getting to the end of their working lives and having a large number of disparate pensions that are not necessarily optimizing how those are treated. And I'm more, I would be concerned that this in part indicates that we are struggling to engage with those people, and so that might be a warning bell for the future. And apart from that, I mean, I think for me there's a philosophical issue about where member input is most valuable. I mean, as Mark picked up on, maximising investment return and keeping down management fees, those are largely concerns, as I say, for the council, because we're on the hook for, you know, investment return. The benefits paid to our pensioners are fixed. That's the glory of a defined benefit pension scheme, and we have to pick up the slack if there is any. So, but for me, I'm particularly welcoming of the responses that shape the nature of our investments, particularly on ethical and climate issues. So that's no question, just the numbers.
It's an interesting point. You do wonder whether some people actually know what they're being asked and how to respond to it. So maybe there's something to take away there and how those questions are framed so that they understand they're part of a certain type of pension. I'll come to you in a second, George. I'm just going to take Henry first.
Thank you very much. I agree with most of the comments that have been made. I'd just like to draw our attention to the fact that the biggest bar chart, the biggest number of respondents who all fitted into one category, excuse me, was in response to the question, should we be invested in companies based in countries that are violating international criminal law, etc. And that was a huge percentage of our respondents were very negative to that. And I think if we were to respond to that wish and exclude companies based in countries that fit that definition, it would exclude only a very, very small percentage, if any, of our investments, but it would send a clear signal that we are, in terms of, I think not only would it, I think it would also, it would remove an element of risk, because I think it's risky to be invested in companies in that situation. Also, I think it removes a reputational issue. If you're a pension holder and you've got an opportunity to invest more in your pension, would it be something that would encourage you to know that that ethical principle is in place? So I just think I would like that specific bit of information to be heard by LPPI, and I don't know whether we should actually make the point as a point C or just assume that they got the overall results, but I just wanted to draw your attention to that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point. And if there were any questions we agonized over for that survey, that was the one, wasn't it? And it does show the strength of feeling behind it. Clearly, Mark's in the room and we're going to be trying to influence LPPI. And I think that's probably very firmly in your mind.
I'm sure that is a discussion subject that will be to the fore going forward.
George.
Thank you, Chair. Mine was, if you like, a technique question or comment, because I'm following Simon's comments. I was going to make the same one about the total responses do not obviously represent the makeup of the total membership. And so, you know, if we're trying to do that, we should be looking to change our techniques. And there are valid statistical techniques to use which do not require a survey to be sent out to the total membership, so long as they're properly statistically and scientifically based. And we might want to consider looking at that. It has the advantage that we can do it more frequently with less effort, and is probably scientifically, statistically more valid than trying to send it out to everybody and have a totally skewed response. So having said that, I'm not casting any doubt on the results we've got, extremely valuable, but I'm just trying to make a comment that says we could do it better.
I think that's a very good point. I mean, who knows where we'll be in 2028? We might all have microchips in our heads or whatever. But I think in terms of planning for the survey, your points are relevant. And I think at committee, we need to be making sure we consider how we approach a survey like that and how we look at statistical data and whether it's qualitative or quantitative and make those decisions then. But it's definitely something we need to be considering. Yeah. Yes, Rachel.
Thank you. Just one little point. When we discussed around the postal issue in September, I believe it was, there was we spoke about whether we on the administration team should include something asking for an email address with our pensioner newsletter and our annual benefit statements that are due to go out this year. So they are imminent. So I don't know if this has changed your mind and you still want to do postal, or whether you want me to put arrange for that phrase to go into both those documents. So it was just to highlight that.
Thank you. I think it's really useful to have email data. How we ultimately align email data with postal data, I don't know, but I think that's, yeah, it is something we need to be looking at for sure.
Okay, we'll include that. Thank you.
Mike, can we have the last question on this item?
Look, just fully support George. There are other ways of doing that make this data more secure. The danger is, as it said, the people who are interested in these things reply, others do not. And you know, if you look at particularly the ones on human rights and things, you know, the way questions are worded, as we all know from watching Yes Minister, you can look at the same topic, ask two different questions and get exactly the opposite answers on these things. So I think following up from George is important. What is interesting to me is the use of AI in doing your summary. I just wondered whether the officers have any response as to the validity of Mr. AI's response to your survey.
all I would say to that is that when we did it in 2022, I put into the report that we did after the survey a selection of comments from that had been submitted on the free text ones, and accused is probably a strong word, but I think I was accused of some level of bias in which comments that I might have picked. So my thought was, well, we won't do that this time. I'll just plug all the comments into AI and get AI to produce a summary, and then I have had no input into that. It's purely come out of AI. So if you don't like the spread of what it said, then it's not my fault.
Whether you believed it was a useful tool in relation to this.
I think it was. I mean, we all know that sometimes AI can produce some strange results, but I think I felt this was a fair summary when it came out. But you can decide.
I think also AI is a massive time saver in that respect, but in my work life, I use 2 or maybe 3 AIs to make decisions like that, and actually you can pair them off against each other just to make sure the information is accurate. So it might be something to take forward next time.
I'm only allowed to use one because that's the council's policy.
Okay, all right. Okay, so I'm going to let's take this to a decision. Do I have somebody? Sorry, let's just remind ourselves what we're doing here. Yes, to approve the survey results be taken to LPPI. Do I have a proposer? Yes, Roberto, and somebody to second. Simon, all in favour? Thank you. Okay, let's move to item 15. Just aware of time now, because we have Brunel, I think, either online waiting for us or will be imminently. Item 15, pension fund treasury management strategy. Again, a decision required here. We're being asked to adopt the Treasury Management Strategy for 26-27 as set out in the appendix. Over to Mark.
Again, I hope this is straightforward. Under the SIPFA Code of Practice, we are required to agree a Treasury Management Strategy each year, which is purely about the cash that we manage for the pension fund, not the rest of the fund's investments. The strategy is similar to the county council's, except that the county council strategy is all about borrowing, and we as a pension fund don't need to borrow, so that's not an issue here. But the key aspect of the strategy is the criteria and limits around where we deposit the fund's cash, which are set out in Table D in the strategy. So we would the policy is pretty much just a continuation of the policy that we had last year. So we just asked the committee to approve the strategy for 26-27.
Thank you. Do we have any comments, Mike?
Do we have any element of an ethical policy that sits alongside this strategy? Because I know on our own district council, we have in relation to banks and organisations we will lend our money to, and others that we will not lend our money to.
Not specifically, no. But all the lending is to banks, building societies, and other. We actually make more use of lending to other local authorities because they're actually providing better rates than the banks and building societies on the whole.
Any further questions? No. Fred, we're still clear. Yeah. Okay. Somebody prepared to propose this item? Mike and Jeff to second. Those in favour? Okay, that's approved. Thank you. Item 16, Peninsula Pensions Administration Update and Performance Statistic. Rachel's been waiting very patiently. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So usual report around the team's performance. So this is relating to Q3. So from October to December 25, the performance when measured against the statutory requirements overall was 94%. And just for openness, previous quarter was 95%, so it's 1% down on the previous quarter. And the high priority procedures a 92%. And these are all outlined in Appendix 1, which gives a full breakdown of all the different categories, high, medium, low, and the variations in between them. The team over that period had a total of 4 compliments that were received and registered. For Appendix 2, the report is highlighting the longer term performance across the team, shows from January 25 to December 25. Just given some figures there in 3.6 on page 186, just for comparison. So the amount of work that was outstanding as at 31st December 25 was 3,786 pieces of work, and the previous year, same point, was 4,589. So it just shows that the outstanding has dropped over that period, and that is despite the work coming in increasing. Appendix 3 of the report highlights the amount of work received over the last 12-month rolling compared to the previous, and that is where you will see that the work has increased. Some of that increase is because we are better at recording information as well, so the new starters are in there as figures, so it's not entirely a whole new amount of work. There's better recording in there as well. I'm happy to go through any of those appendices in more detail. But for the first, well, not for the first time, but unusually there is a decision as opposed to just noting the report that I need you to make. So 3.8 on page 186 refers to administering authority discretions. And these are discretions that Devon County Council has on certain different areas within the LGPS. And there's a document that is on the pension fund site that outlines this, and there's a link there that you can view. The one that we're looking at reviewing is point 31, which relates to complaints, and there's a discretion at there's a discretion at panel, stage 2 panel, which involves officers. At the minute, the wording has Director of Finance and Public Value and Director of Legal and Democratic Services, and also the Head of Peninsula Pensions providing information about complaints at stage 2. For more practical and to give a more robust cover, what we'd just like to add in there is exactly the same wording, but for their deputy, so that there's 4 different people that can go on the panel as opposed to just the 2. And that's the part of this report that I need approval for, please.
Can I just verify, in terms of who is a deputy, is that documented? Who is a deputy at any point in time in terms of the structure within the organisation?
Yeah, it will. Oh, I've still got my, yes, it will just say the deputy of Director and Public Value. It won't have a name. It's the actual job title that it'll have, and then it'll have the same for legal.
Okay, so it's job title. Yeah. Any questions on the report or on the decision we have to make? We all seem happy. Okay, can I have a proposer? Simon, seconder Jeff, all in favour? It's everyone, thank you. Let's move to item 17, the employer performance report. Again, this is over to Rachel. This is purely for noting.
Okay, so as you'll be aware, we separated out the employer performance from the administration team performance. So this is a separate report again. I think really to highlight here, we've got the 2 same appendices, which shows the total number of leavers, the total number of joiners to the scheme, which pretty much on a par, if not like a steep peak in one and not in the other. And then the timescales involved with notifications of receiving those through. I think it should be noted that for this period, there's actually been 7 separate employers that have received a fine for not providing their data in a timely basis. So there's a few more this time. And just to confirm that the fines that have, I think this was the question that was raised previously, the fines that have already happened have been paid. So just to make you aware of that. But these ones here, the 7 new ones, are relating to the more recent period. So, yeah, happy to take any questions across any of those areas.
Yes, Mike.
Be over cheerful. Looking at death in service,
Yeah.
notice you guys, I had to set the tone for the meeting. There were 6 noted on appendix 7, appendix on appendix 1. What's concerning, I would have thought, for us is that it's then the second highest average time to deal with, average of 56 days, and the longest was 109 days. And I would have thought of all the issues we're dealing with there, that possibly is one of the more sensitive ones where help is required quite quickly for grant payments and other matters, particularly if as the people were in service at the time. So is there any way we can make it a priority or alter that and bring that number down?
100% agree with you, and that one was the one that stood out for me as well on the chart. And the individual employers involved in that are being contacted because in the pension admin strategy, again, as you would expect, it is a priority. So yeah, that's being addressed.
And I think for the record, that's been highlighted before at a previous committee as well. So yeah, that's important to note.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Rachel, and your report is duly noted, and we move on. You will have noticed that Angie Sinclair left the meeting at midday, which is a shame because I just wanted to note her contribution to this committee over the years. She retires very soon, in a matter of weeks, I believe. Yeah, and she's made a significant contribution not only to the council but to this committee over a period of 18 years. And I think we should all acknowledge that, and I certainly want that minuted. So a big thank you to her. Moving on to item 18, dates of future meetings. The next one will be 26th of June 2026. The rest are listed there. That's the end of the meeting, but we are going to proceed seeing the guys at Brunel. So let's have a 5-minute comfort break and we'll try and get those online. Thank you, everyone.